and welcome to the opening of the Ideas Workshop for the Future of the Benjamin Franklin Parkway, a parkway for the people. I am Harris Steinberg, Executive Director of the Lindy Institute for Urban Innovation at Drexel University, and I will be your host this evening. We are broadcasting from Lloyd Hall on Boathouse Row in Philadelphia. This evening is special for many reasons. We had planned to be outside this evening on the steps of the Art Museum, and while Mother Nature had other plans, the very fact that we could think of an outdoor event unmasked is cause enough for celebration. But tonight also marks the start of something big for Philadelphia. For the Parkway, Philadelphia's Benjamin Franklin Parkway is always about big ideas and bold visions. With the generous support of the William Penn Foundation, the City of Philadelphia, through a joint effort of Philadelphia Parks and Recreation and the Office of Transportation, Infrastructure, and Sustainability, has selected 3 teams of design luminaries to tackle the next phase of the Parkway. As Philadelphians, we all love the Parkway. It is our postcard to the world. It is where we all come together to celebrate, meet friends, kick back, and hang out. It is our great democratic boulevard connecting City Hall with the Art Museum, defined by beautiful and inspiring architecture. It is where the Eagles celebrate, where the Pope visits, and where kids from adjoining neighborhoods play ball. It is our cultural mile where Rocky meets Renoir, and it is the place where we bring company to show off the beauty and sophistication of our great city. The Parkway evolved slowly, taking nearly 50 years from original concept in the 1870s to design resolution in 1917 with landscape architect Jacques Rader's green wedge of park penetrating deep into the city, connecting Fairmount Park with Center Square. These are largely the bones of the Parkway we see today. The automobile soon co-opted Rader's Park, and by the turn of the 21st century, there were increasing calls to tame the cars and make the Parkway more pedestrian-centric. Building on the city's successful 2013 More Park, Less Way plan, which called for the Parkway that was more park and less highway, the city is now poised to expand that vision and develop a public realm plan for permanent improvements to the Parkway to make it more pedestrian-friendly on a daily basis. To help us do this, the city selected 3 world-class design teams from 18 firms who submitted proposals to participate in an ideas workshop over the next 5 weeks. You will meet the teams later this evening. What is an ideas workshop? First and foremost, it is about getting Philadelphians thinking and talking about big, bold ideas and innovations in public space design, mobility, landscape architecture, and urban design that will pull the many disparate and underutilized spaces along the Parkway into a sparkling and welcoming composition. It's important to note that the design teams will not be producing a final design for the city to select amongst. Rather, we are asking them to develop preliminary concepts for this next phase of the Parkway as a welcoming, engaging, resilient 21st century Parkway for the people, all people. Over the next 2 weeks, the teams will articulate a vision for the Parkway as a people-centric park that also handles traffic, thinking about how mobility modes and traffic patterns might be modified to tip the scales in favor of people over cars. They will look at how key amenities such as cafes and restrooms, bocce courts, and carousels will draw Philadelphians throughout the year. And they will think about balancing history and modernity along this 20th century urban design tour de force we call the Parkway, with its signature axial viewshed connecting City Hall with the Art Museum. They will do this by studying the Parkway, its uses and its patterns, walking the Parkway, speaking with stakeholders, and reflecting back to us the latent potential that the Parkway holds for 21st century urban life. Their ideas will be presented to the public on July 14th at the Barnes Foundation, after which the city will select 1 team to carry out the design of the public realm plan. The events of 2020 and the searing protests on the Parkway stretching from the Art Museum to City Hall following the murder of George Floyd remind us that this next iteration of the Parkway must be an inclusive space that celebrates all voices, all Philadelphians. To help us achieve this goal, we will hear later from Professor Elijah Anderson, the Sterling Professor of Sociology and African American Studies at Yale, and the author of the Cosmopolitan Canopy. Dr. Anderson will teach us about racial civility in public life, its fault lines and its perils, and how the design changes to the Parkway that we are contemplating might encourage the comedy that the Canopy protects. We will also hear later from Dr. David Brownlee, the Francis Shapiro-Weitzenhoffer Professor Emeritus of 19th Century European Art at the University of Pennsylvania. David is the author of Building the City Beautiful, the definitive history of the Parkway. He will explore what the Parkway means for different generations and how its identity has evolved over the past 100 years and what that means for us today as we put our generation's mark on this great boulevard. Tonight, first and foremost, is a celebration of ideas to come. Ideas that will ensure that the Parkway becomes truly a parkway for the people. With that, please welcome Kathryn Lovell, Commissioner of Philadelphia Parks and Recreation. Kathryn has been a leading light in park planning in Philadelphia for some time now. Beginning with her time leading the Fairmount Park Conservancy and now as head of Parks and Recreation, the city has a strong advocate for parks in Philadelphia. Following her remarks, Kathryn will introduce Michael Carroll, Deputy Managing Director of the Office of Transportation, Infrastructure, and Sustainability. For without their joint leadership, this project would not have happened.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Harris. And thank you all so much for joining us here today for the Parkway Ideas Workshop. I'm Kathryn Lovell, Commissioner of Philadelphia Parks and Recreation, and I'm so excited to welcome you all here tonight. We've got a great program ahead. The charge today and of the planning process is to help us create a welcoming, engaging, enjoyable 21st century parkway by bringing together some of the best thinkers and designers in the world. The Parkway is a vibrant, important gathering place for Philadelphians. So many remarkable events happen here. Lots of celebrations, concerts, and civic expression. Whether you're the Pope or Jay-Z or the NFL draft, this is where you want to be. The Parkway is home to world-class museums and institutions like the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Rader Museum, the Barnes Foundation, to name just a few. The Parkway is beloved by users, walkers, cyclists, and runners. With the beautiful tree-lined streets and gateway to Fairmount Park, the Parkway is Philadelphia's Champs-Élysées. So despite the changes in use of the Parkway over the years, one constant remains. The Parkway is the premier ceremonial, civic, and cultural boulevard of Philadelphia. The city and its partners have implemented many of the recommended actions from 2013's More Park, Less Way plan, demonstrating that investments in public space, great thinking, and seeing the Parkway as more of a park and less as a highway can bring people together, build social capital, and reconnect Philadelphians to the Parkway and to their broader community. Demand for public outdoor space is only growing, and exciting public spaces and amenities are coming to the Parkway recently, such as the soon-to-be dedicated Maya Park and the currently in design new museum to famed sculptor Alexander Calder. We have a unique opportunity building on these investments and momentum, and it is time to finalize a unified vision and a plan for the Parkway to take us to the next level and to stretch our ambition of what this magnificent mile could be for Philadelphia. I'm tremendously excited to see the caliber of the design teams who are participating in this Ideas Workshop. Again, this effort is building on some great thinking and the design principles that were called out as part of the More Park, Less Way plan, which are as important, if not more important today. Our goal is to bring more people to the Parkway, to bring more activity to the Parkway, and to make the Parkway more safe and more enjoyable. Not once a month, not once a year, but every single day, to make the Parkway a destination for people, a place for people to find joy and to connect with each other each and every day. We're lucky to have two national experts here today to give some background and perspective on this iconic space at this moment in time. Dr. David Brownlee comes to us from the University of Pennsylvania, and Dr. Elijah Anderson is a faculty member at Yale University and co-author and author of the Cosmopolitan Canopy. Following their presentations, you'll meet and hear from the three design teams in consideration to advance the redesign of the Parkway. I'd like to thank the Lindy Institute for Urban Innovation at Drexel University, and Harris specifically, for their partnership in this planning effort and the Ideas Workshop. I'd also like to give a special thanks to the William Penn Foundation for their extraordinary support of all things parks and for their funding of this initiative. I'd like to recognize the other city departments involved in this initiative, including Parks and Recreation, the Streets Department, Otis, the Planning Department, and the Mayor's Office. I also want to give a special thanks to the Parkway Council Foundation and its board chair, Matt Rader, especially for their help and support and leadership around this Ideas Workshop and this plan for the Parkway. I want to thank the team at Witty Gritty, and last but not least, I want to thank our Deputy Commissioners at Parks and Recreation, Patrick Morgan and Aperna Palantino, for their wonderful leadership. I want to also thank an incredible and progressive leader and my co-leader of this great initiative, and that is Mike Carroll, who's our Deputy Managing Director for Philadelphia's Office of Transportation, Infrastructure, and Sustainability, also known as Otis. He brings an incredible vision to this process, and we couldn't be luckier to have Mike in this role. Please join me in welcoming Mike Carroll.
Thank you, Kathryn, and good evening. I'm not sure who said it first, but I certainly agree that Philadelphia is a city of neighborhoods. I probably say that a dozen times in a given month. But what does that mean, and how does it relate to what we're doing here today? A Philadelphian's neighborhood is burned into their identity. Very, very quickly that becomes the case, no matter where they come from in the world to live in our city. For people who live in Fairmount, or Logan Square, or Parktown Place, this is literally their front yard. At the same time, though, we recognize how the Parkway is one of our city's gifts to the whole world. It epitomizes the notion of an iconic ceremonial space. People involved in managing the Parkway often get wrapped up in balancing the interests of near neighbors with global visitors, and we are certainly interested in ideas that help us do a better job of that. But that's not the only thing we need to think about. The whole city has a stake in what happens in the Parkway. At its best, the Parkway makes Philadelphia one neighborhood. All Philadelphians should have a chance to experience this place. Too often, that only means driving through, but we know it should not only consist of that. The Parkway, both figuratively and literally, is our city's crossroads. It carries tens of thousands of pedestrians, transit riders, cyclists, and motorists every day. The fact is, though, both its current form and function are tightly linked to how it serves only auto use. But I'm happy to tell you, the work we've been doing the last 2 years in evaluating circulation patterns has led to some real breakthroughs. We're discovering real opportunities to rethink patterns of movement that achieve better balance and unlock the ways that the Parkway can safely and comfortably sustain a much broader diversity of transportation choices, and then also fulfill its potential as our signature public space. Now, none of these ideas are set in stone, but they are a resource that we can build on. And what is truly exciting about this design workshop is that we will add even more creative building blocks to this growing store of wisdom and insights and imagination. Given the immense talent that we've brought to the city from around the world, I can barely convey the anticipation and excitement that this moment brings for those of us who care deeply about the Parkway and the future of this space and our city's relationship to it. I'll conclude by reflecting that we stand on very broad shoulders as we consider how to build on a century or more of legacy, which has proven to be both enduring and flexible. This place is not just a street, not just a space, but is part of a vibrant living system. Pay attention to that. To get the most out of it, we have to pay attention to how it operates and how it functions and how we sustain and maintain that function over time. Our success will not be measured by whether or how we finish the story of the Benjamin Franklin Parkway, but rather how we wrote our chapter of that story and how we pass along something that future Philadelphians can both benefit from and build on in their own way when that mandate becomes theirs. Thank you for the opportunity to participate, and now it's my pleasure to introduce Matt Rader from the Parks of Pennsylvania Horticultural Society.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Mike. I'm here with two hats on. So I'm the president of the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society, which has the honor of providing and maintaining many of the gardens along the Benjamin Franklin Parkway, free to all and welcoming to all. And I also serve as president of the Parkway Council Foundation, which is a collaborative of city government, cultural institutions, private businesses, and others along the Parkway. And the Parkway Council has been through an evolution that I think precedes and will help enable the realization of this master plan. So the Parkway Council is a collaborative supported by the dues of its members largely. And in the last couple of years, it's adopted this new vision of being the entity responsible for accelerating the transformation of the Parkway into a great urban park, filled with great cultural institutions, inviting gardens, active public spaces, and exceptional programming that welcomes and engages everyone and enhances the adjacent residential communities. The council serves as a leader and collaborator with city government and other stakeholders. And we really look forward to working with the successful firm in this process and also working with the city and others to realize and operate a transformed parkway. So a couple thoughts for me. The first is that this is a unique moment for parks. I think at this point in time, after the last 18 months, we acknowledge that parks and access to nature are absolute must-haves for healthy life and healthy cities. And that's very different. I think at one time we thought of parks more as a nice to have. And now we really understand that access to nature heals and access to beautiful environments offered by parks heals and is fundamental to life. So the Parkway is an interesting situation. It is absolutely our most iconic civic space and a source of pride for the city. We gather here to celebrate, to mourn, to protest, to learn, and reflect. And at the same time, many people view it really as a beautiful road, punctuated by a number of separate parks, recreation areas, cultural institutions, apartment buildings, condominiums, etc. And to me, that actually is the problem. Because I think the big shift we need to make is to look at the whole land occupied by the Parkway, from Pennsylvania Avenue to JFK Boulevard or Vine Street, from 15th Street to the Art Museum, as one park, an enormous piece of land right here in the middle of the fabulous city of Philadelphia, crisscrossed by bus routes and accessible to rail transit routes that connect hundreds of thousands of Philadelphia to this space. And actually begin to envision it as one park, not a collection of pieces, not a collection of parks and cultural institutions, but one park. And then begin to visualize how we need to organize that park differently to be welcoming and engaging and interesting for people of all backgrounds to come, enjoy, and become inspired. And so for me in this process, I hope you'll think about three things. The first is to unify this space from a collection of pieces into a whole that we're envisioning as a whole, end to end, top to bottom. Stop naming it as separate parks or cultural institutions, but think about it as a whole, knit it together, figure out how we get rid of some paving, think about how we change circulation patterns so they're not all moving from the Art Museum to City Hall, and really re-envision this space. The second is to really think about how to put people at the center, to really move from a parkway that is basically a backdrop for traffic and institutions and recreational amenities into one that is a wonderful place for people to explore. And to me, that means topography, new circulation systems, shrub and vegetative layers, amenities, the whole 9 yards. Think about Olmsted, looking at a piece of vacant land and imagining what it could become in the modern, inclusive city. And then finally, think about us as a Parkway Council and how we play a role together with the city and other players in actually implementing and operating this space as the kind of park we imagine it to be. We know that great parks require design and capital investment, but they also require operation. And for this park to capture its full potential, we need to set up a completely new kind of operating model here in Philadelphia that ensures that it's maintained and programmed and activated in a way that meets this vision. So it's with gratitude that I welcome you to this process. I appreciate the time, and I look forward to seeing what you produce. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Next up, we are pleased to introduce the 3 design teams whom we are fortunate to have the opportunity to work with on the next phase of the project. So you've heard a lot about what the Parkway could become, might become, what people wish it could be. Now we have the opportunity to meet the designers who are going to kind of help us turn those kind of aspirations into, not reality, kind of what it might be if we were to kind of go down those roads. The teams were selected from a field of 18 proposals that the city received. The steering committee was comprised of representatives from 5 different city offices and agencies. There was a truly rigorous review process and interview process, and the teams you see tonight kind of were the result of that exercise. They will have 2 weeks to prepare a response to the following challenge. Help us create a welcoming, engaging, resilient 21st century parkway for the people, _people. The teams will present the results of the sketch problem. And remember, I said it's not going to be a finished design, but rather a robust vision and conceptual framework. They'll present it on July 14th at the Barnes Foundation. We will encourage as many people to attend in real time as we can. The teams tonight will be introduced by video, and they include Design Workshop. Design Workshop is an international design studio working on projects at the intersection of environment, community, art, and economics. With roots in the nascent environmental movement of the 1960s in North Carolina, Design Workshop has grown to include 8 studios with works spanning the globe. Next up is D-Land Studio plus Digsaw. The team of D-Land Studio and Digsaw combines a firm with a national practice, that's D-Land Studio, committed to making cities more ecologically productive, with a rising local firm, Digsaw, focused on the creation of place. You know Digsaw from their Sister Cities Cafe at Logan Square. And finally, MVDRV, with local architecture firm Eck & Ocean Shade Architects. MVDRV is an international design firm located in Rotterdam with offices around the world. Their work captures the energy and complexity of contemporary urban life, infused with both history and popular culture. Their focus is on the city of the future. Locally, MVDRV leads a team that includes Eck & Ocean Shade Architects, the architects of the sculpture garden and parking structure, along with the landscape architecture firm Olin at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. With that, there'll be a series of videos introducing the teams.
Hello, I'm Kurt Culbertson, the Chairman and CEO of Design Workshop. We're very grateful for the opportunity to participate in the Ideas Workshop for Philadelphia's iconic Benjamin Franklin Parkway. We are eager to collaborate with Philadelphians on a future for the Parkway that honors its historic design intent, celebrates the city's cultural richness and diversity, and aspires to embody the hopes and dreams of its citizens. Our team includes Design Workshop, Urban Planning, Landscape Architecture and Creative Placemaking, PCA Stream, Architecture, Ground Reconsidered, Local Landscape Architects, Traffic Calmer, Transportation and Mobility, Mobility and Chain, Transportation Planning and Digital Mobility, the Cultural Landscape Foundation, Cultural Landscapes and Historic Preservation, Kimley Horn, Civil Engineering, CH Planning, Civic Engagement, Meloria Design, Water Resources and Green Stormwater Infrastructure, ETM Associates, Finance and Revenue Generation for Parks and Open Space, and Durham Consulting, Cost Estimation.
Hello, my name is Galen Williams, and I'm an urban designer with Design Workshop. We are thrilled to participate in the Parkway's Ideas Workshop. A collaborative approach to public space design always excites us. I mean, workshop is our last name. We value opportunities to bring together diverse ideas because those concepts foster holistic and innovative design strategy. We intend to provide this creative approach to re-envision historic Grand Parkway. Our goal is to reposition the role of this iconic boulevard from one that is simply ceremonial to one that reflects the hearts and voices of all Philadelphians. To be part of this group, as well as to work alongside citizens of the city, is going to be a key to realizing the transformative vision. This is a messy process, but we are really looking forward to it, understanding how folks want to use the Parkway. This is an incredible time for Philadelphia. We are happy to do our part to ensure that the Parkway maintains its prominence and prestige as a world stage, but also serve the citizens of Philadelphia equally and equitably.
Hello, my name is Philippe Cambaretta, and I'm the founder of PCA Stream, an urban and architectural practice based in Paris. Our team of 90 people of diverse background works on a wide variety of projects, putting research at the center of our work with a dedicated research lab which I founded 15 years ago. Benjamin Franklin Parkway, designed by Jacques Rader in 1917, was inspired by the historic avenue of the Champs-Élysées in Paris. My agency recently completed 3 years of study, developing a vision on how the Champs-Élysées could be re-enchanted and become more pedestrian, ecological, and inclusive. As a partner in this team, we can contribute to the Parkway project by bringing inspiration from the Champs-Élysées today and the many challenges it is currently facing: dense traffic, urban heat island, lack of diversity in its cultural offering, and a completely abandoned 24-hectare park in the heart of the city. The mayor of Paris has called for the implementation of this vision over the next decade. To achieve this goal, the community was highly involved in creating this vision with a public exhibition and the largest public consultation for an urban project in France to date. Our approach was holistic. We invited 50 researchers and experts from very different fields and countries, including, for instance, the MIT Science Lab. Such an approach is, in my opinion, necessary to ensure that we achieve our stated goals, which is to create a parkway more inclusive, more sustainable, more desirable, and hence to maintain the historical connection between Philadelphia and Paris.
We thank you for this opportunity and look forward to a productive collaboration with the people of Philadelphia. Thank you.
So hi, I'm Susanna Drake, the founding principal of D-Land Studio, an interdisciplinary design firm in Brooklyn, New York. We're inspired by the layered history of complex evolution of this public place. The idea of more park, less way, the successes of the Aikens Oval program, and the promise of its future. We believe our team can bring bold, new vision and build upon important city and community-led initiatives already underway. We assembled a strong team of collaborators who we feel are essential to the project. First, our partners, Digsaw Architects, who we first met over a decade ago when we were both named Emerging Voices by the New York Architectural League. They're world-class architects and urban designers with an international portfolio of award-winning work based right here in Philadelphia. We have Tool Design for traffic engineering with their intimate working knowledge of Philadelphia, complete streets, and mobility issues, including coordination with city, state, and federal agencies. For creative placemaking, engagement, and tactical urbanism, we have Shift Space. For regenerative urbanism and green infrastructure, we have Meliora, and they're also here in Philadelphia. And finally, critical to the effort will be Urbane Development because of their unique perspective on economic development, their proven ability to build dynamic neighborhoods and positively impact underserved communities, and their dedication to community empowerment. So we're excited to explore an idea that we call Systems Beautiful. Our approach is rooted in systems thinking. Cities are marked with compelling attractions, but often an underbelly of interstitial, often overlooked infrastructure, the forgotten, abandoned, or underused and single-function spaces of train lines, roadways, and piers. For these spaces, we mine opportunities for recreation, gathering, fabrication, resilience, and ecological habitat. we confront the challenges of global climate change and obsolescent infrastructure with a methodology rooted in research, synthesis, and invention. Our designs are grounded in the intimacy of space, the scale of the everyday, the tactility of materials, and the subtlety of craft. Finding harmony between natural ecologies and constructed systems requires stretching disciplinary boundaries to affect urban policy and inspire collaboration and action with experts who inform our understanding of the dynamic qualities of place. Thank you.
We couldn't be more excited to participate in this Ideas Workshop. Many on our team are based here in Philadelphia, and we spent much of our lives along the Parkway. We walk on it, we drive on it, we play on it, we celebrate on it. It's a truly remarkable civic space, one that shaped many of our city's most cherished memories. But it can be better. It's perhaps more successful as a ceremonial space than it is for everyday life. We've also come to see the ways in which this place, envisioned as a shared cultural center, excludes some members of our community. Through this process, we want to ask how the Parkway can be a great space for both the everyday and the special event. How it can be a model for new ways of thinking about urban park space. How it can welcome both visitors and neighbors alike, and how it can better support all Philadelphians. This is our vision for the Parkway.
NVRDV, an international architecture, urban planning, and landscape firm, founded in the Netherlands in 1993 by Winnie Maas, Jacob van Rijs, and Nathalie de Vries. We work out of our offices in Rotterdam, Shanghai, Paris, and Berlin. And at this moment, we are greeting you from our beautiful office in Rotterdam. Our office is composed of over 300 professionals, mainly architects and urban planners. And we all work together in multidisciplinary, inclusive design processes. And they all involve rigorous technical and creative investigations. We're fortunate to have worked on more than 1,000 projects in 47 different countries. And we always aim to design exemplary and outspoken buildings, urban plans, studies, and landscapes. And all our interventions and buildings we make in such a way that they enable our cities and landscapes to develop towards a better future.
We are honored to have been selected to participate in the Parkway Ideas Workshop, together with our team of local, national, and international consultants. When forming our team, we really focused on striking a balance between local and global insight, and brought diverse voices from Philadelphia to address some of the important issues on the Parkway, and also combine that with internationally renowned consultants that could provide a different perspective for the Parkway's future. Our team of consultants are not only experts in their respective fields, but also represent the inclusive approach that's necessary to address some of the important issues on the Parkway, and also the equity that's necessary in today's architecture and urban planning processes.
We are very excited to take part in this process and are motivated to work with all Philadelphians to celebrate this important public space for the city. The Parkway is an historic and iconic boulevard that is recognized internationally, in particular also following last year's important protests against racial and social injustice, which were reported throughout the world. We see this upcoming Ideas Workshop as a unique opportunity to engage with Philadelphians from all backgrounds, to listen to their needs and their concerns, and to understand how that could affect the future of the Parkway. We look forward to working with the city, the Parkway stakeholders, and all Philadelphians to create an inclusive public space that belongs to everyone in Philadelphia and beyond.
Our team brings a unique design perspective to this workshop and this place. With our experience, we are able to really link global topics to very local issues that Philadelphians are dealing with and that are interested in. Also, our practice is very much based on curiosity and asking questions that are maybe out of the box in order to create innovative solutions together with the people that we work with. So we will create a workshop that brings also a future to Philadelphia and the Parkway that is not just a public space for all the citizens, but it will be a place that is also relevant in the global discussions of our future cities.
Truly an inspiring collection of designers who are going to give us their all in terms of what the Parkway might be. But before we do that, as I mentioned earlier, tonight we are fortunate to be able to hear from two experts who will help us construct the intellectual framework for the Ideas Workshop. Both Elijah Anderson and David Brownlee have spent a good part of their distinguished academic careers observing, writing about, and teaching about Philadelphia, understanding what makes her tick. And while many of the observations that they will share tonight are hyper-local, they have uncovered some universal truths to help guide the efforts of the Idea Workshop. Elijah Anderson, the Sterling Professor of Sociology and African American Studies at Yale University, is right up there in my book with William White and Jane Jacobs as a keen observer of the urban scene. Before moving to Yale, Elijah was on the faculty of the University of Pennsylvania. His observations on human behavior are trenchant, and his prose is lyrical and lucid. You can taste and smell the Reading Terminal Market as he draws you under its enveloping and protective bower. Elijah is a jazz flautist, and the syncopated way in which he unpacks hard truths is evident in his work. He will speak tonight on racial civility in public life, and his talk is entitled The Cosmopolitan Canopy. He'll be followed by David Brownlee, whom, as I mentioned before, is the Francis Shapiro-Weitzenhoffer Professor Emeritus of 19th Century European Art at Penn. David is a true civic citizen of Philadelphia, serving on a plethora of local boards and committees focused on Philadelphia's built environment. His knowledge of Philadelphia's architectural history is encyclopedic, delving into the work of hometown heroes such as Lou Kahn, Robert Venturi, and Denise Scott Brown, not to mention being the definitive historian of the Parkway. David will speak tonight on how the Parkway's meaning and use has evolved over the last century, and how we might think about its 21st century identity. In his spare time, David and his wife Ann can be found on their sailboat in the Chesapeake. David will speak tonight on the Parkway as urban artifact. First up will be Elijah Anderson, followed by David Brownlee. Gentlemen.
Thank you, Harris. Thank you. I appreciate that very much. I want to say that I'm an ethnographer, not simply an observer, but an ethnographer. And I've spent time in various parts of the city of Philadelphia, observing, making sense, writing books about these spaces. And my most recent book is The Cosmopolitan Canopy, Race and Civility in Everyday Life. And that book, like my talk today, does not sugarcoat. It tries to tell the truth. It tries to render the situation accurately. And this is what I'm trying to do here today. The city today is often thought of as comprising essentially three types of public space: Black space, white space, and racially mixed space. And these spaces are typically in flux, changing from white to black to white, but they remain in a racially mixed steady state, somewhere between black and white. In some such racially mixed neighborhoods, like Grace Ferry and certain parts of Kensington or Southwest, racial tensions arise from time to time. But under the Cosmopolitan Canopy, such tensions rarely occur. The Cosmopolitan Canopy is a concept I want to introduce you to. It is an island of racial civility located in a sea of segregated living. It is a somewhat magical public space of social convergence amid segregated ethnic enclaves. Philadelphia is the sixth most segregated city in the nation, and yet the city is dotted with these islands of racial civility. Great examples of the canopy are settings like Rittenhouse Square, the Reading Terminal Market, Starbucks, some downtown offices, and certain self-consciously mixed neighborhoods of the city. In Center City, these canopies work or play off of one another and create a synergy, resulting in a cosmopolitan zone. I mean, Center City is a cosmopolitan zone, a setting where all kinds of people move about in civility. People essentially get along, even those from the most parochial neighborhoods may pride themselves for being what they call downtown behavior. The cosmopolitan canopy is a metaphor for civil society, a kind of setting our school teachers, our high school athletic coaches, our ministers, our rabbis, our priests, and often our parents encourage us to fit into and to judge other people not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. The canopy is a metaphor for civil society. Under the canopy, there are essentially two types of people, or two dominant orientations: cosmopolitan and ethnocentric, and those from parochial settings tend to be ethnocentric. I call these people cosmos and ethnos. Cosmos, they like everybody, while the ethnos are much more discriminating. To them, you are not considered a full person unless you look like them. And they come in all races, you see, ethnos and cosmos. Everyone has some degree of cosmo and some degree of ethno inside of them. And they code switch depending on the social situation. Some city dwellers are hardwired to be cosmo, and some are hardwired to be ethno. Under the cosmopolitan canopy, dominated as it is by cosmos, people are strongly encouraged to express their cosmos side and keep their ethno side in check. And for the most part, people do. People generally get along in these spaces. The big problem under the canopy occurs when the ethnocentric person has simply had enough and he draws the color line. This person can no longer be tolerant or just can't stand the level of social diversity he or she is surrounded by. It is in these circumstances that such a person may express their ethnocentric side and simultaneously give discomfort to other people under the canopy, but especially those who are most often marginalized: Black people, Muslims, gay people, Asian people, and others. Now, this is when people on the margins can experience the sting of disrespect based on their race, their ethnicity, their gender, their sexual preference, or whatever. When this occurs, the canopy often becomes rented, and its principal values of social tolerance become under attack, assault. Now, such incidents can be large or they can be small. The small ones, like so many slights, are usually glossed over, but the big ones cannot be ignored. And not only are they hurtful to people, but they also rent the canopy. They threaten its collapse, even its destruction. They can even be lethal, like in the case of George Floyd and other Black men who have been murdered and assaulted by the police. This is more common than ever today, and the police are not held accountable. Very rarely. Now, this is what happens when people are unable to keep their ethnocentrism to themselves or their racism in check. This is when the usual politeness or the social gloss erodes, and this is followed by surprise, even shock or injury to those with provisional status. those who feel most marginalized under the canopy, including Black people, Asians, gay people, Muslims, sometimes Jewish people, or various other ethnic minorities. The so-called, Black people call this, and this is a trigger warning, Black people call this the N-word moment. And the N-word moment is the third rail of American race relations. This rail is electric and hot and is often approached with extreme caution. And one does not need to be Black to experience this moment. As I said, one can be gay, one can be Muslim, one can be Asian, one can be Jewish, whatever. In reaction, the canopy changes into self-defense mode and relies basically on its reserves of social gloss. In effect, the people of the Cosmopolitan canopy gradually undergo a period of soul searching and maybe even repair that helps the canopy return eventually to its normal state. Now, this is roughly what happened in the Starbucks incident of April 2018, when 2 Black men were arrested in Starbucks, essentially for living while Black and being at Starbucks at the same time. Black people, as I say, call this the N-word moment. And this was a big one that made nationwide news, causing Starbucks to undergo some serious soul searching. The Cosmopolitan canopy concept illuminates a new racial dynamic in America, spotlighting the color line. The formal institutional supports for racial caste have been weakened, so segregation is no longer state-sponsored or supported, and formally defines racial belonging. Racial incorporation and integration and the visibility of successful Black people foster the notion that we live in a post-racial America, but that is an illusion. Today, the color line can be drawn out of the blue when Black people and others on the margins least expected. For those who belong or see themselves as middle class, the N-word moment comes as a shock, followed by a stinging sense of humiliation, being told that you don't belong. The challenge is to make these spaces and the Parkway itself inclusive. For long after the fact, Black people often jokingly refer to this as the N moment. But when one is going through this, it is no fun. It is no fun. So what contributes to the canopy? Typically, it results from an organic process. Rittenhouse Square and the Reading Terminal Market were not created overnight. They grew to be what they became over time. The urban environment and its public spaces have been reshaped by the racial incorporation processes of the 1960s and 70s and 80s, and by rising immigration. Contemporary immigrants are often people of color, while the nation as a whole is becoming more and more diverse. Philadelphia remains one of the most racially segregated urban areas in the country. As I said, this nation's 6th most segregated city. At the same time, we are changing from a segregated to a desegregated society in the context of an economy that is also changing from manufacturing to service and high technology, including robotics and cybernetics. And the great number of our citizens are not able to make an effective adjustment to this change. And they are left largely on their own, you see. Many manufacturing jobs have left for non-metropolitan America overseas to developing nations whose populations literally compete with our poor and middle-class people here. As their standard of living drops, the result is grinding structural poverty that is, of course, experienced by the least among us. I'll stop there, but what I've tried to document here, tried to point to here, is that we have work to do in terms of inclusion. And this is what I hope the Parkway Project can to some extent embrace and try to include as it is produced, as it goes forward. Thank you very much.
We gather this evening to talk about one of the most widely recognized urban landscapes, the Benjamin Franklin Parkway. And we gather to contemplate its future, energized by the importance that it has played in our recent past, when it has been both poignantly but usefully empty during the lockdown in April 2020, and significantly full when Philadelphians gathered to affirm that Black Lives Matter in May of last year. I believe that those events showed again that the Parkway is a durable, versatile resource with a memorable distinctiveness of form that is very important to us, although it is not connected to any singular or unchanging function. It is an example of what the architect and planner Aldo Rossi called fatti urbani, urban artifacts, he called them in his book, The Architecture of the City, in 1966. Rossi's examples of urban artifacts included the great market hall and multi-purpose Palazzo della Ragione in Padua, a late medieval Renaissance building that has served many uses while looking the same. And he also talked about Roman amphitheaters, like the one in Nîmes, whose unforgettable shape has, in its long life, been occupied variously by shops and dwellings, and it has even enwalled a tiny neighborhood within its ellipse. I believe that we, similarly, can use our urban artifact, the Parkway, in many ways, and new ones, without putting its cultural value at risk. Indeed, its versatility is its cultural value. What are the Parkway's distinctions as an urban artifact? What are the secrets of its potency? And what must be preserved as we contemplate change? Because I'm a historian, I'm often asked, what was the original idea for the Parkway? And I can say honestly that there was no singular plan. From the time the roadway was first contemplated right after the Civil War until a critical mass of public buildings had appeared in the early 1930s, myriad plans were presented, abandoned, altered, and reintroduced. But all of them were united by one simple and large visual idea: to connect the center of a huge industrial city with its great park, to connect the man-made urban grid with the curvilinear forms of nature, and to connect them with a straight line from City Hall to the Fairmount Reservoir, which rose at the park entrance and is now the site of the Art Museum. This simple idea is the first important aspect of our urban artifact, and it is made mighty by superlatives. In the late 19th century, Philadelphia was America's greatest industrial city, and the iron-topped City Hall that stood and stands at its physical and symbolic center, what that building was until 1908, the tallest building on Earth. It's shown overtopping its Philadelphia peers on the left and among its international rivals on the right, including the Singer Building in New York, which was the first to rise higher in 1908. Of course, you know that City Hall was the tallest building in Philadelphia until 1987. The superlative at the other end of this beeline was the vastness of Fairmount Park, whose lands began to be assembled in the 1850s, and which we Philadelphians are resolute in calling the largest park in the world. This big, simple, unforgettable idea was put on the city's official map in 1893. But it was only in 1906 that the city committed itself to buying and demolishing the 1,600 buildings that stood in what was then a relatively new but quickly obsoleted industrial district, framed by the Reading Railroad to the north and the Baltimore and Ohio to the west, that stretched between the reservoir in blue, through Logan Square, in green and on to City Hall. What is now the Rodin Museum site was the Knickerbocker Ice Company, not a business with a bright future. The Barns stands in part on what was the Miles Bement and Pond Machine Tool Company, which served the Great Baldwin Locomotive Works, which was at this time already moving out of town. The Schuylkill waterfront was occupied by coal yards and soap works, and right in front of the Art Museum steps was the Star Braid Works and the Penn Iron Roofing Company. The simplicity of the Parkway idea was not easily achieved in this landscape. It had to be defended. When demolition began in 1907 with this house on 22nd Street, across the street from the Ice Works and what is now the Rodin Museum, it was on a route that had been adjusted to avoid the costly appropriation of certain industrial properties. The roadway zigged through Logan Square, which of course had wrecked the axial view, and zagged at Fairmount in a way that kept the parkway from aligning with the Reservoir Hill, which by 1906 was slated to be the site of the new art museum. The Fairmount Park Art Association, the still extant guardian of the public realm in Philadelphia, hired a trio of expert architects to review the plan. Bring in the experts. That should sound familiar to us this evening. Although the three, Horace Trumbauer, Clarence Zanzinger, and Paul Cray, stood miles apart on most questions of architecture, they agreed that a straight line from City Hall to the museum was essential. And the mayor was convinced. The roadway was straightened, preserving the simple idea, and it was put on display in City Hall at the Third National Conference of City Planners in 1911. Burnham's plan for Chicago and the Macmillan plan for Washington were on view in adjacent rooms. Demolitions resumed, and by October 26, 1918, in the wake of the flu epidemic and on the eve of the armistice of the First World War, the parkway was opened from end to end. But the imaginary buildings on the 1911 model had not appeared. And so a second major rescue of the idea was undertaken, in the course of which a second important feature was added to our urban artifact. This time it was the Fairmount Park Commission, which is also still with us, subsumed by the Department of Parks and Recreation. It was they that hired the French landscape architect Jacques Rader to convert this deficit of architecture into a surplus of gardens. He envisioned what he called a coin de verdure, a wedge of green, that would bring the park into the city rather than a building-lined avenue that took the city to the park. Rader's vision was brilliantly presented to the public with an exhibition of huge, colorful drawings and lively perspectives, big spreads in the Sunday newspapers, and a special color brochure. It was never formally adopted by the city, however, but it became the general public conception of the parkway. And that vision kept spirits up while waiting and waiting for the public buildings to begin to arrive. In truth, the effect was still bare even with the opening of the Free Library in 1927, the Art Museum in 1928, and the Franklin Institute in 1934. But that's because we got a kind of watered-down bureaucrat's version of the Rader plan, which lacked one of its most important features, the ribbons of varied pocket parks that he showed lining both sides of the roadway. Only at the Rodin Museum, on the left, where Rader returned to create a garden in the late 1920s, was a piece of his vision fulfilled in his own lifetime. But more pieces of this garden puzzle have been placed in the last decade. The Rodin Museum garden has been refreshed and expanded by Olin to include the entire block. And Olin also created the wonderful garden of the Barnes Foundation next door. Across the parkway, Ground Reconsidered has designed a park for the setting of Gerhard Marx's sculpture Maya. And a distinctive garden will also be part and parcel of the Calder exhibition gallery that we expect to see very soon. This work builds on Olin and Ground Reconsidered's earlier work in traffic taming and park making in Logan Square, which has now been extended to narrowing the roadways and rebuilding the sidewalks and widening them and replanting the trees between Logan Circle and Aikens Oval. This still incompletely achieved small-scale embroidery of lateral gardens is, I think, a vital counterpoint to the Parkway's hard-won, gigantic simplicity. And of what use is this urban artifact of this great axis? While it may serve adequately as a vehicular corridor, it is at its best as a parade route, beginning with the Pennsylvania troops who arrived back from France in May of 1919, and continuing as the route of the Thanksgiving Parade, annual ethnic and national festivals, the first Earth Day, and of protests. However, the Parkway itself is not the only urban artifact with which we have to reckon. It needs to be understood in combination with another, the great Yellow Palace of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the largest museum ever built at once, with its famous steps. It's important to note that those steps weren't included in most of the preliminary designs of the building, although they do appear in one of these great 1919 perspectives by Julian Abel, who was Penn's first African-American architecture graduate. Abel was not, I think, the principal designer of the building, although he coordinated its construction in the office of Horace Trumbauer. And he did design other buildings for Trumbauer, including the Philadelphia Free Library and the Widener Library at Harvard. The vitally potent vista-filling steps did not appear in earlier designs because they were not judged to be an essential or even an attractive way to enter the building. The principal and preferred entrance, it was imagined, would be on the north side, at street level, where the great lobby and majestic vaulted tunnel, just refurbished by Frank Gehry and reopened, lead to the elevators that make step climbing unnecessary. The steps are really the reverse of what they may first appear to be. They are not a practical way to gain access to the museum, but they do terminate the Parkway vista emphatically. And they are a splendid viewing platform from which to see the city, transforming it into a backdrop, as it seems to be at first in this photo of a July 4th concert in 1951. But note that it is the massed choir that is on the steps, with the audience seated on the flat paving at their feet. It happens that the museum and the city itself can trade off being the stage set. The impracticality of this most memorable urban artifact is in fact its vital feature. This was, of course, the point of its appearance in the movie that now gives it its name, The Rocky Steps. Sylvester Stallone, as Rocky, ran up the steps in 1976 because they were an obstacle whose overcoming would be an accomplishment, not because, but alas, they were a route to great art. And it is in this theatrical sense that the combination of museum steps and Parkway, our double-barreled urban artifact, functions in our society today, spreading its cosmopolitan canopy over the crowds who come to the Welcome America concerts and fireworks on the 4th of July, which started in 1993, and to the Made in America extravaganza that Jay-Z has orchestrated on Labor Day, beginning 9 years ago. The steps of the museum and the museum portico are now the defining, importance-conferring backdrop for the enactment of our religious beliefs, led by the Pope in 2015, and for the expression of our secular desires, embodied in the NFL draft in 2017. So important is that backdrop, in fact, that when the NFL stage cut off the view of the actual museum portico, a styrofoam replica was built to stand in for the real thing. Of course, this is where our cosmopolitan community also recently assembled to demonstrate our political aspirations. On May 30th of last year, Philadelphians gathered in the tens of thousands in front of the Art Museum steps at the head of the Parkway. I am pretty sure that they did not choose that site because one of the architects of the building was African American, or because of because of the cachet of the museum's important African American collections, including paintings by Henry Ozawa Tanner and prints by Doc Strash. No, they gathered there because they were the Rocky Steps at the head of the Parkway, perhaps because they symbolized anti-establishment achievement, but surely because these strong urban artifacts have come to be associated with the recurrent gathering of our community, our Cosmopolitan Assembly. After hearing speeches and kneeling for 9 awful minutes, the crowd moved towards Center City. And I think it is significant that they did not even pause at the objects that had been created to monumentalize the cause that united them. They were not moved to stop and cheer by the passionate vigor of the memorial to the soldiers and sailors who defeated the Confederacy in the Civil War. They were not slowed by the emotional and physical veerism of the All Wars Memorial to Colored Soldiers and Sailors, which was moved to Logan Square in 1994. Of course, they ignored the Swan Fountain, the city's most gorgeous memorial, which most people think has to do with long-necked birds, not realizing that Dr. Swan was a great 19th century philanthropist. What kind of art and physical planning can make people stop, can move modern hearts and minds? I think there is hope for a modern, monumental art that makes us think about important and complicated things. And in my lifetime, that has been embodied most powerfully by Maya Lin's Vietnam Memorial, that marvelously therapeutic wound in the earth, in which reflection, both metaphorical and real, is unavoidable. We need more monuments and spaces like that, which do not lecture us, but that challenge us to think afresh, both individually and as communities. We need monuments like Sharon Hayes's unpopulated pedestals, erected in Rittenhouse Square in 2017 as part of the citywide Monument Lab project. Her pedestals ask us, with stunning simplicity and beauty, to contemplate what our monuments have failed to do, whom and what they have neglected. I also admire Caitlin Pomerantz's Monuments Lab project in Washington Square, which consisted of recreated front stoops made of salvaged material. Her work invited passersby to become part of the art, to form a community by simply sitting down. We need more public spaces like that. We certainly don't need more white men and horses on pedestals, or even, I would say, black men and women on pedestals. We need a public realm that speaks the language of our time. We need civic design that is like Hamilton and not like the Pirates of Penzance. I think the prospects are auspicious for accomplishing that here. We have already done a lot of good work on the Parkway, although we probably want to look for better venues for truly prodigious crowds, and we certainly want to tame traffic and do more to draw Philadelphians to the Parkway on ordinary days, and to make it possible for folks to visit museums and for nearby residents to live their lives when there are events here. But at the head of the Parkway, we have Philadelphia's front stoop, with a mile-long vista to the tallest building in the world, at least as we Philadelphians measure things. To finish the job, we just need more places to sit down, metaphorically and for real.
Thank you, David and Elijah. So much is rattling around my brain right now. We have invited David, Kathryn, and Mike to be here on the panel. Elijah is at home in New Haven, and now it's time for us to kind of try to digest some of what we've talked about tonight, heard, and kind of thinking about the future. I'm struck by two things which I'd like to kind of start as a prompt for our discussion. In the book, The Cosmopolitan Canopy, Elijah lists some physical defining elements of a canopy, which, as an architect, for me is great news. It's how we start. The question I bring to the group, and after I kind of give my little spiel, is, can we design in civility? Can we actually make places through our kind of purposeful manipulation of space and form will create the kind of canopy that Elijah talks about. So for Elijah, these four kind of characteristics are: one, the canopy has to be separated from the city around it. Think of the Reading Terminal Market where you go through the doors and suddenly you're off Filbert Street or off 12th or 13th Street and you're in the market. You have to be able to walk through it. Clearly you walk through the terminal, you walk through Rittenhouse Square. There's food as the great social lubricant that brings people together. We sometimes take that for granted. And they are crowded and intimate human spaces. So as we begin to think about the future of this, which is a relatively vast space, the Parkway, yet contained and traversable, what does it mean to actually think about creating that canopy within the Parkway itself? I'm also, and I'll throw this in, and whether it's kind of all part of the wash or we think of it separately, just absolutely taken by David's metaphor of the steps of the art museum has filled up his front stoop. Kathryn and I had the actually same epiphany as he was saying that. It just makes it all real. Now that is what the steps are. There are stoop. This is pure Philadelphia, where again Rocky meets Renoir. So let's pause a minute, and I'll throw it out to the panel as well as to you, Elijah, in New Haven. Can the next iteration of the Parkway be a cosmopolitan canopy? And this is there's no test after this. We're really just thinking out loud. The beauty of this is that we've got two academics and we have two folks who are actually going to be building the next iteration of the Parkway. So I think the opportunity to kind of blend those worldviews is really quite extraordinary. So who wants to kind of take a first pass at it?
Well, let me offer a couple of thoughts. I think, first of all, it's important to say that in some significant ways, the Parkway has already begun to function in the way that Elijah has identified in Rittenhouse Square. It is a place where people come together. It is not a place that is confined to us, and it is not a place that, except on extraordinary occasions, feels crowded. And I'm not sure that one can accomplish a sense of enclosure and crowdedness as a regular thing in the Parkway, but it does seem to me that the smaller spaces that the Parkway comprises, the smaller gardens, and those spaces that are focused on particular activities, offer a Rittenhouse Square-like density of experience. I'm very strongly struck, and I have been singing this song for a long time, that a Parkway needs to have food, that it is essential, that it is perhaps the single most transformative thing that one could do, to be, to roll a hot dog stand out to every corner. A very nice hot dog stand, of course. But I do think that Elijah's analysis of the patterns of ordinary behavior that occur around eating, and to some extent around just sitting in the park, that the ordinariness of that kind of activity is something that we need to try to foster.
I think what makes how the Parkway is different in its current state from some of the spaces that Elijah mentions, like taking a Reading Terminal Market, for example, or Rittenhouse Square. It is the vastness of the space. So I really appreciated what David said about these sort of micro spaces within the vast space that bring us together and create that different experience. But I also want to, I know we talked about this at length in the public dialogue. You also don't see those other spaces aren't thoroughfares, right? They're not highways, and I think that the relationship of the space to the cars, right? And I know we talked at length about this in More Park Less Way. That is something that we just desperately need to figure out, because I don't know, you know, I'm certainly not the one to say how we manage that relationship. Might be someone else who, and certainly the design teams, you know, that's a huge charge for them to figure out. But I just don't. I think that's a huge obstacle to, you know, and sort of what makes it different from some of those other spaces.
So I think, you know, Kathryn has said, yes, there's some intimacy, but there's also kind of permeability, because the Parkway along its whole length is really traversed by city streets. So Michael, as the traffic engineer who was really quite a visionary from what I've seen in terms of how your mind thinks, what are you making of all this? Because you're coming at it from very much a practical engineering point of view, but I think you also quite wonderfully understand sort of the human side of it, and you have to balance it.
Well, I would say I'm honored to share a virtual stage with Dr. Anderson and David, and of course you guys as my colleagues. And you know, I'm happy to be able to contribute the perspective of someone who has to deal with kind of the nuts and bolts of these conversations. But the nuts and bolts have to serve a purpose, right? And part of what we're talking about with the Parkway, whether we're talking about it in terms of a thoroughfare or we're talking about it in terms of a space underneath the canopy, you know, shaded by canopy, is how we respect and promote the interactions that we want. And some of these interactions are going to be very much about the business of people's everyday lives. That's the nature of the city. But we also want to promote the interactions which create connection. And I think that's what we're trying to balance. And so we have a parkway which maybe once a year, twice a year, promotes the kind of interaction we're talking about at a large scale. But we want something that's more intimate, more immediate, more frequent. And if we want that, we have to figure out how to make this space more accessible to people. So those types of movements are going to be on foot. They're going to be by bike. They're going to be by transit, and less so at 40 miles an hour or 50 miles an hour speeding along the parkway. So that's how we have to engineer this space to respect the concepts that Dr. Anderson and David and Kathryn are talking about.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I just want to make one observation that I think it's important for us Philadelphians to remember. We tend to, you know, Philadelphia isn't nearly as bad as sort of a society is. And one thing about what we perceive as the vastness of the Parkway is that so much of that is a psychological vastness, because it is only 1 mile from the museum to City Hall. And a 70-year-old man will walk that in 23 minutes. I know that from experiment. You know, that this isn't like dealing with the Mojave Desert. It really has enormous capacity for for connection of all kinds.
I have a note here that Elijah, the audio is fixed. So give us some of your thoughts about where Philadelphia is today, kind of relative to kind of over the last, say, 20 years as you have kind of observed kind of Philadelphians. Do you think that there's a hunger for these kind of spaces in Philadelphia? And will the attempt to perhaps try to create one on the Parkway out of many sort of small canopies have a chance of success?
Yeah, I think this goes after we're seeing a return to the city, a return to the urban environment, sunrise, looking around, for a long time. It seems to be catching right now. And part of the I believe is the community-like spaces and the hope of that as they in the city. I think the Canopy is an edifying institution. And what I didn't say is that there's a kind of thing that goes on. It's in this book. God talk. People engage in people. They watch other people. They learn with people by watching people. And there's a lot to be said for that. And people seem to be having fun. They seem to be enjoying themselves. And this becomes an exercise. And so the city becomes a magnet. And this is what's part because we part of this.
There's a bit of chicken and egg, I think, in terms of what Elijah is describing and what the reality is here. I think this is what we've all been kind of struggling with over the years. It's a fantastically beautiful set piece. It can be lots of different things, and yet that walk from City Hall to the museum is bereft of much to do other than to walk. And I think that's where the intimacy, how we jumpstart that, I think is the essence of this challenge, right? With the cars, with the park, with the activity, with the stoop, and with our relationships, is what are the first moves we make?
Well, I think you're spot on, and I think that even what there is to do is indoors, right? So of course these museums want you to come in, right, to see and experience, the incredible treasures that are within them. But there's also, I think part of this conversation has to be with those cultural institutions to think about how they also come outdoors. And many of them have done it in really wonderful ways, through over the last few years, with summer programming, et cetera. But it's really, they have to be a critical part of this conversation. And yes, there has to be more to do. I mean, right now the cars are a distraction, and I totally agree with David that it is psychological, right? Of course, it's only a mile, but when you see the predominant mode of transportation on that mile being vehicles, you get the sense that it's a drive, right? It's not a walk, it's a drive. And when there's it's a perfect storm of most of the activities being indoors that are available, mostly people driving up and down the space, and not much else to do. Unless there's a programmed event occurring there, and then all of a sudden it's embraced and people love it.
Well, and it goes from being there's no one there to being 100,000 people.
Right.
And I think that we really have to plan a way that creates the more intimate experience for a few hundred people, or maybe just a dozen people at any given time. It does strike me, I know that the new restaurant in the Art Museum is capable of setting up food service in the courtyard of the Art Museum, for instance. I do know that the Rader Museum's pre-COVID experiment with basically having cocktail hour in the garden at the Rader Museum in the evenings, and this goes back to the food is the answer thing. I do think that in some respects it is the easiest thing to pull off because it doesn't require a great deal of building.
Well, let's not forget the one thing that there is to do on the Parkway that people absolutely love, which is to visit the Rocky statue. I mean, our estimates at Parks and Rec is that it's over 10 million people a year that are coming to visit the Rocky statue, and they're getting their picture there. So I think
they're taking their life in their hands.
They're taking their life in their hands to get there. But it's interesting that we haven't created that, right? That is something that the community themselves has created as a destination and a thing to do on the Parkway. And when you talk to the visitor center, they say it's one of the top, most requested tourist destinations in the city next to the Liberty Bell. People show up at Fifth and Market and say, how do I get here? They're pointing to the Rocky statue. So I think it's an organic experience of people thinking of what there is to do there as well.
So we're nearing time, but I want to ask Mike Carroll one last thing, because talking about the Rocky statue and actually folks who take their lives in their hands to get there, what are your preliminary thoughts about sort of disentangling all of that sort of spaghetti of roadway that merges right up against people's desire to take their photo with Rocky?
Yeah, well, that clearly doesn't work, right? And we don't want that. We want people to feel like they're not taking a risk in order to do something that feels like they're enjoying themselves, they're visiting Philadelphia, they're experiencing Philadelphia. So I would like to connect more of the Parkway together. And we're looking at ideas to connect the Oval to the Art Museum, for example, and to retain space if we need that space for some ceremonial use, but to establish traffic patterns that make it easier for pedestrians to get to the Art Museum, to get to the Oval, to really reconnect these places where people can be in their dozens and not necessarily in their thousands and really enjoy each other.
I mean, that's really a great place to stop here, because when Mike Carroll first told us about this idea, It's 2 years ago now, probably, in your offices, Kathryn. I was just blown away with how visionary that was. Again, coming from an engineer, particularly, not to disparage the profession, but I thought this project is in the right hands between Kathryn and Mike. It really is the moment for us to kind of not necessarily rethink the Parkway, but to stitch it back together, or stitch it together in a way that can accomplish all of these aspirations. I want to thank all of you, Elijah, for beaming in from New Haven, Mike, Kathryn, David. It's been really a wonderful evening. I'm sure there's lots of technical issues that we're going to have to kind of hear about, but we are excited. Tomorrow we meet at the Sister Cities Cafe at 8:45 with the teams to walk the Parkway, meet with stakeholders. The Ideas Workshop has started. I mean, so much of it is the intellectual fervor of tonight's discussion. We look forward to being back on July 14th and are excited about the weeks to come. So thank you for joining us, and stay tuned.